The cream-colored envelope sat innocently on my doorstep, but something about it made my stomach twist. No return address, just my name in precise, angular handwriting. I almost didn't open it. I had a million things to do before my engagement party tonight. But that handwriting seemed to dare me, like it knew something I didn't. My name is Lila, and until that morning, I thought I had everything figured out. Loving boyfriend, supportive family, and a future that seemed to glow with possibility. Funny how one letter can shatter all that. Inside was a single sheet of expensive paper, the kind my father uses for Montgomery Enterprises letterhead. The message was brief. Your perfect life is built on lies. By the time I'm done, everyone will know what the Montgomerys really are. Starting tonight. I read it 3 times, my hands shaking more with each pass. The threat wasn't what scared me. We dealt with cranks before. It was the paper. Only executives at my father's company had access to that letterhead. This wasn't some random person. This was someone who knew us. My phone buzzed. Jake's face lit up my screen, probably calling about last-minute party details. I let it go to voicemail. Instead, I called my father's private line. Lila. He answered on the first ring. I was just about to call you. Dad, I got a letter. Come to the office. Now. His voice had that edge I hadn't heard since the merger crisis 3 years ago. Use the private elevator. The drive to Montgomery Enterprises felt surreal. Downtown gleamed in the morning sun, all glass and promise, while my mind raced through possibilities. Who would want to hurt us? Why now? Security waved me through to the executive parking level. The private elevator opened directly into my father's office suite, where I found him standing at his floor-to-ceiling windows, hands clasped behind his back. Show me the letter, he said without turning around. I placed it on his desk. He glanced at it, his face tightening. There's more. What do you mean? He finally turned to face me, and I barely recognized him. My father, always the picture of corporate confidence, looked haunted. The company is in trouble, Lila. Serious trouble. Someone's been embezzling funds, millions of dollars, and covering their tracks for years. The SEC is investigating. That's impossible. You run everything by the book.
¿Y tú, Tidit?
He sank into his chair. But someone's been very clever. And now they're threatening to expose everything right when we're most vulnerable. My engagement party. Of course. What better time to destroy a family's reputation than when all eyes would be on us? We have to cancel the party, I said.
No.
His response was sharp. That's exactly what they want. We show weakness now, and it's over. The party goes on. Your mother's already at the venue overseeing setup. My phone buzzed again.
Jake.
I silenced it. Dad, who would do this? Who has access to? A knock interrupted us. His assistant poked her head in. Sir, the board is waiting in the conference room. He stood, straightening his tie. Lila, go home. Get ready for night. Act normal. I'll handle this. But, trust me. He gripped my shoulders, something he hadn't done since I was a kid. Whatever happens, remember that everything I've done has been for this family. Something in his words sent a chill through me. There was more he wasn't telling me. As I rode the elevator down, another text came through. Not from Jake this time, but an unknown number. Ask your father about Project Phoenix. Ask him what really happened to David Chen. I'd never heard of Project Phoenix. But David Chen, that name I knew. He was my father's former partner who disappeared 5 years ago. The police called it suicide, but they never found a body. The elevator doors opened to the lobby, and I stepped out into a world that suddenly felt like quicksand beneath my feet. In 12 hours, my engagement party would begin, and someone was planning to burn my family's legacy to the ground. The engagement party was a disaster. Not because of any dramatic revelations or public scandals. Those would come later. No, it was the silence that killed me. The way my father worked the room with his practiced smile, while my mother's hands trembled around her champagne glass. The way Jake kept touching my elbow, asking if I was okay, while I watched every guest like they might be the one holding our family secrets. 3 days later, I found myself standing in the Miller's driveway, surrounded by moving boxes. Jake thought I was moving in because we were taking the next step in our relationship. The truth was, I couldn't breathe in my own house anymore. Every corner held whispers of Project Phoenix and David Chun. "Let me help with those," Jake said, grabbing the heaviest box from my car. His parents stood in the doorway of their modest two-story home, Tom with a welcoming smile, Nancy with something harder in her eyes. "Welcome home," Tom said, pulling me into a warm hug. The scent of his aftershave reminded me of weekend barbecues and simple happiness. Nancy's hug was briefer, more hesitant. "We've cleared out the guest room," she said. "It's small, but it's perfect," I cut in, not wanting to hear the apology in her voice. The Miller's house might be a quarter the size of my family's estate, but it felt more honest somehow. That evening, as I unpacked my clothes into the tiny closet, my phone buzzed with another text from the unknown number. "Your father's not the only one with secrets. Ask Jake about Sarah." I deleted it immediately. These mind games weren't going to work. Jake was the one solid thing in my life right now. Dinner was a quiet affair until Nancy cleared her throat. "So, Lila, will you be going back to work at Montgomery Enterprises?" "I'm taking some time off," I said, pushing peas around my plate. "Family emergency." "Of course," she said, her fork scraping against the plate. "Family is everything to the Montgomerys, isn't it?" "Mom," Jake warned, "I'm just making conversation." But her tone said otherwise. "It must be nice having that luxury. Taking time off whenever you need to." Tom reached for her hand. "Nancy." "No, it's fine," I said. "You're right.
I'm very fortunate."
The words tasted like ash in my mouth. Later that night, I couldn't sleep. The guest room felt too small, too unfamiliar. I crept downstairs for water and froze when I heard voices from the kitchen. "Can't just pretend everything's normal," Nancy was saying. "Have you seen the news? Montgomery Enterprises is under investigation. What happens when it all falls apart?" "That's not Lila's fault," Jake replied. "No, but she's part of it. And now she's here, bringing all of that into our home. I don't want you getting dragged down with them." "I love her, Mom." "Love won't protect you from scandal. Ask Sarah." The glass nearly slipped from my hand.
Sarah.
The same name from the text. "That was different," Jake said, his voice tight. "And we agreed never to talk about it. I'm trying to protect you. I don't need protection. What I need is for you to accept that Lila is going to be my wife." I backed away from the kitchen, my heart pounding. Who was Sarah? And why did Nancy sound so afraid? Back in my room, I pulled out my laptop and opened a private browser window. My fingers hovered over the keys before typing. Jake Miller Sarah scandal. The search results loaded, and my blood ran cold. There, dated 5 years ago, was a headline I'd never seen before. "Local photography studio closes amid fraud allegations. Owner Sarah Chun missing." Chun. The same last name as my father's missing partner. My phone lit up with another text. "Now you're asking the right questions. Want to know more? Meet me tomorrow. Alone." Below was an address and a time. I should have deleted it. Should have told Jake or my father. Instead, I found myself typing back a single word. "Yes." Through the thin walls, I could hear Nancy and Jake still arguing downstairs.
About me.
About secrets. About protection. They had no idea I was about to blow everything wide open. The coffee shop where I was supposed to meet my mystery contact was exactly the kind of place Jake would love, all exposed brick and vintage cameras on the walls. I arrived 20 minutes early, chose a corner table, and waited. Every time the door chimed, my heart jumped. At exactly 10 o'clock, a woman walked in. Tall, elegant, with dark hair pulled into a severe bun. She locked eyes with me immediately and smiled. Not a friendly smile, more like a cat who'd found a particularly interesting mouse. "Hello, Lila," she said, sliding into the seat across from me. "I'm Sarah Chen." My mouth went dry. "You're supposed to be missing." "Missing is relative. I prefer to think of it as strategic relocation." She stirred her coffee slowly. Just like your father's partner, my uncle David, strategically relocated 5 years ago. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed.
Jake.
I silenced it. Ignoring your fiancé? Sarah's smile sharpened. Does he know you're here? What do you want?
To warn you.
You're about to marry into a family with secrets that make your father's embezzlement scandal look like a parking ticket. The Millers are good people. Sarah laughed, but there was no humor in it. Jake never told you about our photography studio, did he? About what really happened to all that investment money?
My phone buzzed again.
This time a text. Where are you? We need to talk. Important. 5 years ago, Sarah continued, Jake and I had a dream. A high-end photography studio. Your father was one of our investors through a shell company, of course.
But the money disappeared.
Along with evidence that could have implicated both our families in something much bigger. You're lying. Am I? Ask Jake about the offshore account. Ask him why Nancy is so desperate to keep you away. She stood up. Oh, and one more thing. Check your father's calendar for March 15th, 5 years ago. The day both David Chen and the studio's money vanished. She left me sitting there, my coffee going cold. I pulled out my laptop and logged into my father's calendar. I still had access from my days working at Montgomery Enterprises. March 15th, 5 years ago, was completely blank. Suspicious for a man who documented every minute of his day.
My phone buzzed a third time.
Jake again. Nancy told me about last night. About you searching for Sarah. Please come home. I can explain everything. Home. The word felt hollow now. I packed up my things and drove, but not to the Miller's house. Instead, I found myself parking outside Jake's photography studio. The place he'd built from scratch after starting fresh, his words, 5 years ago. The studio was closed on Mondays, but I had a key. Inside, everything looked normal, pristine,
Professional.
until I noticed the woman's coat draped over a chair in his office.
Designer.
Expensive. Not mine. Lila. I spun around. Jake stood in the doorway, looking exhausted. Behind him was a woman I'd never seen before, wearing clothes that matched the coat. It's not what you think, he said quickly. Really? Because I think you've been lying to me. About Sarah, about the studio, about everything. I was trying to protect you. Funny. Your mother said the same thing about protecting you. I grabbed the coat off the chair. Who is she, Jake? The woman stepped forward. I'm Jennifer Chen, Sarah's cousin, David's daughter. The room seemed to tilt. Why are you here? Because, Jake said, his voice cracking, we're trying to fix what our families broke. Before someone else does it for us. My phone buzzed one final time. Another unknown number. Now you know who to trust. Or more importantly, who not to. Time to choose a side, Lila. Your father's board meeting is tomorrow. Things are about to get very interesting. I looked at Jake, at Jennifer, at the pristine studio built on lies. Tell me everything, I said. No more protection. No more secrets. Jake closed the door. It started 5 years ago with Project Phoenix. The truth, when it finally came, would change everything. But first, I had to survive hearing it. Project Phoenix wasn't just about money. As Jake and Jennifer laid out the truth, I felt the floor disappearing beneath me. The photography studio had been a front, a way to launder money from Montgomery Enterprises through seemingly legitimate art purchases. My father and David Chen had orchestrated everything, using Jake's dream as cover. Sarah figured it out, Jennifer said, spreading documents across Jake's desk. That's why she disappeared. And why my father had to disappear too, I finished. The weight of it all pressed against my chest. But why are you telling me this now? Jake reached for my hand. I pulled away. Because tomorrow's board meeting isn't just about the embezzlement scandal, Jennifer said. Your father's planning to announce a merger with Chen International. That's impossible.
David Chen is dead.
Is he? Jake's voice was soft. Or did he just relocate to Hong Kong, where he spent 5 years building a company specifically designed to swallow Montgomery Enterprises?
My phone rang.
Mother. I answered on speaker. Lila, where are you? Your father's looking everywhere. He needs you at the house.
Why?
A pause. Because the Chun family lawyers are here. I ended the call, my hands shaking. You knew. All this time you knew. Not everything, Jake said. Not at first. Sarah tried to warn me, but I was too ambitious, too desperate to prove myself. By the time I understood what was happening, I was already implicated. And Nancy? Is that why she's so afraid? Jennifer pulled out another document. Nancy worked as a bookkeeper for the studio. She saw the numbers. She knew something was wrong, but speaking up would have implicated Jake. So, she kept quiet. The pieces were falling into place. And now she's terrified history will repeat itself. Tomorrow, Jennifer said, everything changes. David Chun returns from the dead. Montgomery Enterprises falls. Unless what? Unless we stop it. We have proof, all of it. Sarah's been gathering evidence for years. But we need someone on the inside. Someone they trust. My phone buzzed again. A text from my father. Come home.
Please.
There are things you need to know. I looked at the documents scattered across the desk. Bank statements. Photos. Emails. 5 years of lies unraveling. If I help you, I said, what happens to my father? That depends on him, Jennifer replied. On whether he's willing to tell the truth about what really happened to my father. Jake touched my shoulder. This time, I didn't pull away. Lila, whatever you decide, I'm with you. But you need to know, Sarah isn't just trying to expose the truth. She wants revenge. Don't we all? I stood up, gathering the documents. I need to go home. My father's waiting. Be careful, Jennifer warned. David Chin trusted Charles Montgomery once too. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the city in shades of gold and shadow. I sat in my car, staring at the last text from the unknown number. Sarah, I realized now. Choose a side. But which side? My father, who built an empire on secrets and lies. Jake, who kept quiet to protect his family. Sarah and Jennifer, seeking justice or revenge or both. I started the car and headed home, the documents heavy in my bag. Tomorrow's board meeting would change everything. But first, I needed to look my father in the eye and ask him about David Chin. About Project Phoenix. About all the truths he'd buried beneath our perfect family facade. As I pulled into our driveway, I saw unfamiliar cars parked outside. Through the living room window, I could see my father pacing, my mother sitting rigid on the couch, and several men in suits I didn't recognize.
My phone lit up one last time.
Sarah, remember, they'll try to protect you. But protection is just another word for control. I grabbed the documents and stepped out of the car. It was time to choose a side. My side. After the confrontation with my father, I returned to the Miller's house in a daze. The meeting had gone exactly as Sarah predicted. My father tried to protect me with carefully crafted half-truths about David Chen's unfortunate breakdown. But his eyes kept darting to my bag, where the documents felt like they were burning a hole through the leather. The house was dark except for the kitchen light. I found Nancy sitting alone at the table, a manila envelope in front of her. Couldn't sleep either? She asked. Long night. I moved to the coffee maker, but she stopped me.
Sit.
Please. Something in her voice made me comply. She pushed the envelope toward me. I found these in Jake's old darkroom. From 5 years ago. Her hands trembled slightly. I should have shown them to you sooner.
Inside were photographs, dozens of them.
My father with David Chen. Late-night meetings at the photography studio. Exchanges of briefcases. And in the background of several shots, a younger Jake, watching through his camera lens. He was so proud, Nancy whispered, getting hired to document Montgomery Enterprises' corporate events. He thought it was his big break. Until he saw too much. She nodded. Sarah tried to warn him. When she disappeared, I thought. She swallowed hard. I thought they might come for him next. My phone vibrated. Sarah, ask her about the safety deposit box. I looked up sharply. Nancy's face had gone pale. How long have you been in contact with Sarah?
I asked.
Before she could answer, we heard the front door open. Jake's voice called out, "Mom? Lila?" Nancy grabbed my wrist. "Whatever you decide, remember, some secrets protect more than just the guilty." Jake appeared in the doorway, looking between us. "Everything okay?" "Fine," Nancy said quickly, too quickly. "Just girl talk." I gathered the photos, my mind racing. "Actually, Jake, I need to ask you something. About a safety deposit box." The color drained from his face. Behind him, Nancy made a small, choked sound. "How did you—" He stopped, realization dawning. "Sarah contacted you directly, didn't she?" "Jake," Nancy warned.
"No, Mom."
"No more protection." He sat down heavily. "The box contains Sarah's original financial records from the studio. And a video." "Of what?" "The night David Chin confronted your father. The night everything fell apart." My phone buzzed again. This time, a message from Jennifer. "Board meeting in 6 hours. David Chin landed at the airport 20 minutes ago. It's starting." Nancy reached for the photos. "You can't use these. They'll destroy both our families." "They already have," I said, standing up. "We just didn't know it." "Where are you going?" Jake asked. "To the bank. That video might be the only thing that proves what really happened." "Lila, wait." Nancy's voice cracked. "There's something else you need to know. About your mother." I froze. "Margaret wasn't just David Chen's business partner," she said. "They were planning to expose Charles together. The night David disappeared, she was supposed to meet him." The room spun slightly. "My mother? She chose to protect you instead. Just like I chose to protect Jake." Nancy's eyes filled with tears. "Sometimes love means keeping the wrong secrets." My phone lit up one final time. An unknown number, but I knew who it was. "Time's up, Lila. The truth doesn't protect anyone anymore. It's time for justice." I looked at the photos in my hands, at Jake's tortured expression, at Nancy's tears. In 6 hours, David Chin would walk into Montgomery Enterprises and tear both our families apart. Unless— "The safety deposit box," I said. "Take me there. Now." Because Sarah was wrong about one thing. The truth doesn't bring justice. It brings choices. And I was done letting others choose for me. The safety deposit box was empty. Of course it was. I stood in the bank's private viewing room, staring at the void where our salvation should have been, while Jake paced behind me. "Sarah must have moved it," he said. Or maybe this was all part of their plan." I slammed the box shut. "Get us running in circles while David Chun takes everything." My phone buzzed. "Jennifer, where are you?" "Board meeting in 30 minutes. Then another message from Sarah. "Did you really think I'd leave evidence sitting in a bank? Check your mother's study. 3rd drawer, false bottom. She's been keeping secrets longer than you know." I showed Jake the message. His face hardened. "This feels wrong. Everything feels wrong." I checked the time. "The board meeting starts soon. You should go home." "Lila." "I mean it, Jake. Whatever happens next, I don't want you involved." He grabbed my arm as I turned to leave. "Stop trying to protect me. That's exactly what got us here. Everyone protecting everyone else until we're all drowning in secrets." Before I could respond, both our phones chimed. A news alert. "Breaking. David Chin returns. Montgomery Enterprises facing hostile takeover." "I have to get to my mother's study," I said. The drive home was a blur. The house was empty. Everyone would be at the office for the board meeting. I ran upstairs to my mother's study, my hands shaking as I pulled open the 3rd drawer. The false bottom lifted easily. Too easily. Inside was a single USB drive and a handwritten note in my mother's elegant script. "Lila, if you're reading this, I failed. I couldn't stop what your father started. But maybe you can finish what David and I tried to do. Just remember, the truth isn't always what it seems. Love, Mom." My phone rang. "Sarah." "Did you find it?" she asked. "Yes." "Good. Now listen carefully. In 10 minutes, David Chun will present evidence of Charles Montgomery's crimes to the board. Unless— "Unless what?" "Unless you bring that drive to me instead." Meet me at the photography studio. 5 minutes. I looked at the drive in my hand. Why should I trust you? Because I'm the only one who knows what's really on that drive. And believe me, it's not what you think. The studio was dark when I arrived. Sarah stood by Jake's old darkroom, her silhouette sharp against the window. The prodigal daughter arrives, she said, turning, with Mommy's little insurance policy. I held up the drive. Tell me what's on it. The truth about Project Phoenix. About why your mother really chose to stay quiet. About what Jake saw that night through his camera lens. Stop playing games. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. You want games? Check your phone. A new message waited. A video clip. Security footage from 5 years ago. The photography studio. My father and David Chin arguing. Then my mother entering the frame. The timestamp matched the night David disappeared. Keep watching, Sarah said softly. I did. And everything I thought I knew crumbled. My phone buzzed again.
Jake, don't trust her.
Nancy just told me everything. Sarah's not who you think she is. But it was too late. I looked up from the phone to find Sarah holding a gun. The drive, she said.
Now.
You're not doing this for justice, I realized. This isn't about protecting anyone.
No.
She stepped closer. It's about making everyone pay. Your father. Your mother.
Jake.
Everyone who chose silence over truth.
My phone lit up one final time.
A message from an unknown number. The board meeting starting. Time to choose, Lila. Your family's legacy or the truth.
Sarahes gandite wafer.
The drive. I looked at the USB in my hand, at the gun pointed at my chest, at the frozen image of my mother on my phone screen. 5 years of secrets and lies, all leading to this moment. You want the truth? I said. Here it is. I made my choice. And everything exploded. The boardroom erupted into chaos when I burst through the doors, Sarah right behind me with her gun. David Chin stood at the head of the table, my father at the other end. My mother sat between them, her face ash-white. Nobody move, Sarah commanded, but her hand was shaking. The USB drive felt heavy in my pocket. Sarah, David Chin said softly. This wasn't the plan. Plans change. She gestured with the gun. Show them, Lila. Show them what Margaret Montgomery has been hiding all these years. I pulled out the drive, but instead of handing it over, I held it up. First, tell them who you really are. Tell them why you're really here. Her eyes narrowed. You don't know anything. I know you're not Sarah Chen. I turned to David. Tell them. Tell them about your real daughter. The room went silent. David's composed facade cracked slightly. The real Sarah Chen died 5 years ago. I continued. The night of the confrontation. She wasn't just documenting the corruption. She was trying to stop it. And someone in this room killed her. My father stood up. Lila, that's enough. Sit down. Not Sarah snapped, her gun now trained on him. Let her finish. The woman holding the gun is Karen Chen, I said. Sarah's cousin. And she's not here for justice. She's here for revenge. Karen's laugh was bitter. Smart girl. But you're missing one detail. She nodded to David. Tell them, Uncle David. Tell them who really killed Sarah. My mother's chair scraped back. I did. The confession hung in the air like smoke. Karen's hand steadied. Mom, I whispered. Why? Because Sarah discovered something worse than embezzlement. She looked at my father, then David. She found Project Phoenix's real purpose. Money laundering was just the surface. They were funding something much darker. Human trafficking karan spat. Through art purchases. Clean money for dirty secrets. I pulled out my phone, clicked play on the video I'd discovered on the drive. Security footage showed Sarah confronting my mother that night, showing her evidence. The argument. The struggle. The accident that sent Sarah falling. I tried to stop her from going to the police, my mother said. I thought I was protecting our family, but I was wrong. So wrong. That's why you stayed quiet, I realized. Why you helped David fake his disappearance. To dismantle the operation from the inside. Karen's gun wavered. And now everyone pays.
No.
I stepped between her and my parents. Enough people have paid already. The boardroom doors burst open again. Jake rushed in, followed by Jennifer, and my heart stopped. The real Sarah Chin. "Drop the gun, Karen," Sarah said. "It's over." Karen's world collapsed in her eyes.
You read it.
I saw. You saw what they wanted you to see, what I needed everyone to see, so I could finish what I started. Sarah moved closer. "Put down the gun, cousin. Let me finish this the right way." The gun clattered to the floor. As security rushed in, I watched my father sink into his chair, defeated. My mother reached for his hand, but he pulled away. "The evidence is all here," Sarah said, holding up another drive. "Every transaction, every name, every victim. It's time for real justice, not revenge." I felt Jake's hand on my shoulder. "You okay?" I wasn't. I'm not sure I ever would be again. But as I watched the truth finally emerge, watched my father being led away in handcuffs, watched my mother's quiet strength as she prepared to face her own consequences, watched Sarah embrace her cousin, I understood something. Sometimes protection means letting go. Sometimes justice means facing the truth, no matter how much it hurts. And sometimes love means choosing neither revenge nor protection, but something harder: forgiveness. I took Jake's hand and squeezed it. We had our own truth to face, our own choices to make. But for now, in this moment, it was enough to know that the real story was finally being told. And this time, everyone would listen. 6 months later, I stood in front of Montgomery Enterprises for the last time. The building looked different now, less imposing, more honest somehow. The company's new name would be unveiled today: Phoenix Foundation, dedicated to supporting trafficking survivors. My mother waited by the entrance, elegant even in her ankle monitor. House arrest suited her better than prison, and her testimony had helped bring down the entire network. "Ready?" she asked. I nodded, though ready wasn't quite the right word. How do you get ready to say goodbye to everything you thought you knew? Inside, Sarah Chun was directing the press conference preparations. She caught my eye and smiled. We developed an unexpected friendship in the aftermath, bonded by the weight of secrets we'd both carried. "Your father asked to see you," my mother said softly. Before the announcement, I found him in his old office, now Sarah's. He looked smaller somehow, his designer suit replaced by something simpler. "Prison changes people," they say. "Sometimes for the better." "The company's in good hands," he said, looking out the window. "Sarah has a vision I never had. Redemption instead of profit. Is that why you wanted to see me?" He turned, his eyes tired but clear.
No.
"I wanted to tell you I understand now. Why you chose truth over protection. Why your mother did too, in her own way." "Better late than never," I said, but without bitterness. We'd moved past that. My phone buzzed. "Jake." At the airport. "Paris assignment confirmed. Last chance to change your mind." I smiled but didn't respond. Jake and I had found our own kind of truth in the end. Not the forever kind we'd planned, but something equally valuable: the courage to let go, to grow separately instead of breaking together. The press conference was starting. As Sarah announced the company's transformation, I studied the faces around me. Nancy Miller, no longer afraid, sitting beside Tom. Jennifer Chun, working with Sarah to rebuild their family's legacy. Karen, beginning her own journey toward healing in a rehabilitation program. My mother squeezed my hand as cameras flashed. Tomorrow, I'd start my new job at a small nonprofit, helping families torn apart by trafficking rebuild their lives. It wasn't the future I'd imagined, but it felt right. After the ceremony, I found a letter on my desk. No return address, but I recognized the handwriting, the same angular script from that first threatening note that started everything. Inside was a single photograph, me at 18, laughing with my father at a company party. On the back, Sarah had written, "Sometimes the greatest act of love is letting go of who we thought we had to be." My phone buzzed one last time. An unknown number, but this time I wasn't afraid to answer. "Hello." Miss Montgomery? A young woman's voice, shaking slightly. My name is Emma. Sarah Chin gave me your number. She said you might understand. About family. About starting over. I looked at the photograph in my hand, then out at the city skyline where my father had once stood plotting empires. Yes, I said. I understand completely. Would you like to meet for coffee? Because that's the thing about truth. It doesn't end with exposure. It begins there. Every revelation is just the start of another story, another chance to choose between protection and honesty, between revenge and redemption. I gathered my things, ready to leave Montgomery Enterprises behind forever. But as I reached the elevator, my mother called out, Lila, are you sure about this? I thought about Jake in Paris, chasing his dreams. About my father finding humility in consequences. About Sarah and Jennifer rebuilding from truth instead of lies. Yes, I said. For the first time in my life, I'm absolutely sure. The elevator doors closed on my old life, and I smiled. Some people might call it a happy ending, but I knew better. It wasn't an ending at all. It was a beginning.
I was always the other daughter. The one who didn't need constant attention. While my younger sister Sarah battled asthma, I battled invisibility in our own home. Every morning started the same way, Mom rushing to Sarah's room to check her breathing, while I got myself ready for school. Sarah, honey, how are you feeling today? Let me check your temperature, Mom would say, her voice dripping with concern. Don't forget your inhaler. Do you want me to call Dr. Thompson? I remember standing in the doorway, already dressed and ready for school, watching this daily ritual. My lunch was always whatever I could throw together myself, usually just a sandwich and an apple. Sarah got specially prepared meals with all her favorite foods. Dad wasn't much different. He worked extra hours to pay for Sarah's medical bills, and when he was home, his attention went straight to her. How's my little fighter doing? He'd ask, completely passing by me on his way to Sarah's room. The pattern continued year after year. While Sarah went from specialist to specialist, I learned to take care of myself. I did my homework without help, packed my own bags for school trips, and figured out how to deal with teenage problems on my own. Mom never worked, she was too busy being Sarah's personal nurse and advocate. By my senior year of high school, I had perfect grades and a clear plan. I applied for scholarships behind my parents' backs. They were too busy taking Sarah to yet another specialist to help with college applications anyway. The day I got my full scholarship letter, I ran home excited to share the news. I found Mom in the kitchen, preparing Sarah's special allergen-free dinner. Mom, I got a full scholarship to State University. You and Dad won't have to pay anything. That's nice, dear. Could you set the table? Sarah needs to eat on schedule with her new medications. That moment crystallized everything for me. I realized I would never be the priority in this house, no matter what I achieved. But instead of letting it crush me, I let it fuel me. I didn't need their attention or approval. I had something better, I had my freedom. The day I left for college, Mom was too busy with Sarah's latest health crisis to even say goodbye properly. Dad just handed me some gas money and said, "Drive safe." College flew by like a dream. I threw myself into my studies, made real friends for the first time, and graduated with honors. The marketing department at Reynolds and Company snapped me up right after graduation, and suddenly I was earning more money than I'd ever seen in my life. I hadn't heard much from my parents during college, just the occasional text from Mom asking if I was doing okay before immediately launching into updates about Sarah's latest health issues. But that changed once I started working. The first call came about 6 months into my job. "Erica, honey," Mom's voice was sugary sweet, a tone I hadn't heard directed at me before. "Your father and I are in a bit of a tight spot. Sarah needs some new treatments, and with the medical bills." I cut her off. "How much do you need, Mom?" "Oh, just $2,000. We'll pay you back next month." They never did pay me back. Not for that loan, or the next one, or the one after that. But honestly, I didn't care. For the first time in my life, I felt like I had something they needed, and that gave me a strange sense of satisfaction. Then I met Mike. He always making me laugh, always seeing the bright side. We dated for a year before he proposed, right there in that same break room with a ring hidden in a coffee cup. When we told my parents we were getting married, Mom's first response was, "Oh, but Sarah's having some health issues right now. We might not be able to contribute much." "We don't need anything," I told her firmly. "We're handling it ourselves." And we did. We had a small, perfect wedding with just our closest friends. Mike and I paid for everything ourselves, took a modest honeymoon to the beach, and came back ready to build our life together. We both worked hard and saved every penny we could. Within 2 years, we had enough for a down payment on a small apartment. 3 years later, it was paid off completely. "We should have a baby," Mike said one night, as we sat on our balcony watching the sunset. I looked at him, this wonderful man who had given me everything I'd never had growing up, unconditional love, support, and a true partnership. "Yes," I said. "We should." Emily was born on a spring morning, perfect and healthy. Mike was the proudest dad I'd ever seen, taking pictures of every little thing she did. When she was 2 months old, he got a big promotion at work. "Just one business trip," he told me, kissing Emily's forehead. 3 days in Chicago, then I'm all yours again." I drove him to the train station that morning. That was the last time I saw him. The call I got wasn't from Mike, it was from the railway company. There had been an accident. The train had derailed. There were no survivors. The first few weeks after Mike's death passed in a blur. I moved through my days like a ghost, going through the motions of feeding Emily, changing her, trying to keep both of us alive while feeling half dead inside. The insurance company called with details about Mike's life insurance policy, but money wasn't what I needed most right then. I needed help. "Mom," I said over the phone, my voice cracking. "I can't do this alone. Could you help me with Emily? Just for a few months while I get back on my feet. I'll pay you, whatever you want." There was a long pause on the other end. "Oh, honey," Mom said, and for a moment I felt hope. "Then, I'm not as young as I used to be. Taking care of a baby is so demanding, and with my blood pressure. I just can't risk my health, Erica. Maybe you could hire someone? You have the insurance money now, right?" The words hit me like a slap. I thought about all those years Mom had devoted to Sarah's care, how she'd never worked, because Sarah needed her constant attention. But now, when her other daughter needed her, when her granddaughter needed her. "Yeah," I said flatly. "I'll figure something out." And I did. I found a wonderful nanny named Maria who loved Emily like her own. The insurance money meant I could afford the best care for my daughter, and slowly, we settled into a new normal. Emily grew from a baby into a toddler, showing more of Mike's smile every day. Then came the call about Sarah's engagement. "Your sister is marrying James Peterson," Mom gushed over the phone. "His family owns that big real estate development company. Can you believe it?" "That's great," I said, watching Emily stack blocks on our living room floor. "I'm happy for her." But the next call wasn't so joyful. Dad sounded stressed. "Erica, we need to talk about Sarah's wedding. We're taking out a loan. Using the house as collateral." When he told me the amount, I felt sick. "Dad, no, that's your house. Your retirement security. You can't risk that for one day." "Now listen here," he said, his voice getting that stern tone I remembered from childhood. "We won't have the Petersons thinking we can't give Sarah a proper wedding. We've already signed the papers." I tried reasoning with them. I offered to help pay for a more modest celebration. But Mom just got offended. "You don't understand, Erica. This is Sarah's big day. She deserves her dream wedding. We can't have her future in-laws thinking we're common." I thought about my own wedding, small, modest, perfect. Mike and I had paid for everything ourselves, proud to start our life together without debt. But of course, Sarah needed something grander. Sarah always needed more. Sarah's wedding was exactly what you'd expect, extravagant, over the top, and, according to Mom, absolutely perfect. Then Sarah moved away with James to Boston, and suddenly my parents' perfect daughter wasn't so perfect anymore. Can you believe she won't even take our calls? Mom sobbed into the phone one evening. We took out that loan for her wedding, and now she won't even help with the payments. I bit back and I told you so, and instead said, that must be hard, Mom. Gradually, my parents started calling more often, not just when they needed money. They wanted to see Emily, invited us for Sunday dinners, remembered my birthday for the first time in years. It felt nice. Like maybe we could be a real family. I started helping them out, paying bills here and there, buying groceries. For Dad and Mom's 35th wedding anniversary, I surprised them with a 2-week vacation to Florida and a new car for Dad. You're such a good daughter, Erica, Mom said, actually hugging me. It was the first time I could remember her doing that in years. Then Dad got sick. Really sick. Something with his heart that kept him out of work for months. One evening, they asked me to come over after Emily's bedtime. We're going to lose the house, Dad said, his voice weak. The loan payments, without my salary. Mom was crying. We don't know what to do, Erica. We're behind on payments already. Move in with us, Mom suggested suddenly. We could help with Emily after school, and you could help with the loan payments. Please, sweetheart. We don't want to lose our home. I thought about my apartment, my independence, the life I'd built for myself and Emily. I don't know, Mom. It's an hour commute to work from here. Please, Dad said, and I saw real fear in his eyes. We'll make it work. Emily would love having her grandparents around. They were right about that part. When I told Emily we might move in with Grandma and Grandpa, her whole face lit up. Within a month, we were moved in. I found good tenants for my apartment, a young couple with steady jobs who signed a year-long lease. Emily was overjoyed, running around the house exploring every corner like it was a magical castle. I took over the loan payments and most of the household expenses. Mom seemed to transform overnight into the grandmother she'd never been before, picking Emily up from school, helping her with homework, making her favorite snacks. Look what Grandma made for you, Emily, she'd say, pulling fresh cookies from the oven. Emily would beam, and I'd try not to remember all the times I'd come home to an empty kitchen as a child. For a while, it seemed to work. Dad's health improved, though slowly. I adjusted to the long commute, telling myself it was worth it to see Emily so happy. Every month when I made the loan payment, I reminded myself that I was helping my parents keep their home. But there was always this nagging feeling in the back of my mind, a voice that whispered, how long can this last? When will the other shoe drop? After Dad recovered and returned to work, I noticed Mom started making excuses about watching Emily. My back hurts today, Erica. I'm not as young as I used to be. It's so exhausting keeping up with a child her age. Finally, one morning, she just came out with it, I think you should hire a nanny. I can't handle this anymore. So I hired Karen, a sweet older lady who clicked with Emily immediately. Every morning, I'd leave for my hour-long commute to work, wondering why I was still living in my parents' house when I had a perfectly good apartment across town. But every time I mentioned moving back, Mom would bake her famous apple pie, the one she knew Emily loved, and say things like, oh, but we love having you both here. Don't we live so well together? Emily would beam, her face covered in apple filling, and I'd push down my frustration for another month. This went on for 2 years. Then one evening, Mom and Dad sat me down after Emily went to bed. Honey, Mom started, her eyes already welling up. We still have 2 years left on Sarah's wedding loan. Dad jumped in, we know it's a lot to ask, but could you stay until it's paid off? We're so close to being free of it. I thought about the exhausting commute, the way my life had been put on hold. But then I thought about Emily's happy face when she talked about living with her grandparents. Okay, I said. 1 more year. I called my tenants and extended their lease. Then came the day that changed everything. I walked up to the house after another long day at work, and there was Sarah, standing in the doorway with a very pregnant belly. "Move away from the door, Sarah," Mom screeched from inside. "You'll catch your death in that draft." Sarah smirked at me as she stepped aside. Well, look who's here." Inside, it was like stepping back in time. Mom was fluttering around Sarah like a worried hen, adjusting pillows, checking her temperature, asking if she needed anything. "I made your favorite dinner, Sarah. And there's herbal tea for the baby." During dinner, Sarah dropped her bombshell. "I've decided to have the baby here," she announced. "So you and Dad can help with the newborn." Mom's face lit up like a Christmas tree. "Of course we will. We'll help with everything." I sat there, fork frozen halfway to my mouth, as the memory hit me like a physical blow. Me, alone with 3-month-old Emily, desperately calling Mom after Mike's death. "You know I can't risk my health taking care of a baby, Erica." I looked at my mother, really looked at her, and saw with perfect clarity what I'd been trying to ignore for years. Nothing had changed. Nothing would ever change. Sarah would always be the one who needed them, and I would always be the one who needed to understand. For the next 2 weeks, I watched history repeat itself in excruciating detail. Mom waited on Sarah hand and foot, bringing her breakfast in bed, scheduling doctor's appointments, and stocking the house with her favorite foods. The monthly apple pie that had been Mom's way of keeping Emily and me there? It stopped appearing altogether. The final straw came one evening when I overheard Mom and Sarah discussing nursery plans for my room and Emily's room. I couldn't take it anymore. I walked into the living room where everyone was gathered. "So that's it? You're just going to pretend the last few years never happened? That Sarah didn't abandon you with a massive loan that I've been helping pay?" Sarah rolled her eyes. "Oh, here we go. Saint Erica to the rescue." "Sarah, honey, don't get upset. It's not good for the baby," Mom fussed. "No, let's talk about this," I pressed on. "Let's talk about how you mortgaged your house for her wedding, and then she disappeared. Let's talk about how I've been paying that loan while she was off living her best life." "That's none of your business," Sarah snapped. "Nobody asked you to pay anything. If you're so unhappy here, why don't you just go back to your precious apartment?" "Erica," Mom cut in, practically pushing me toward the door. "Why don't you run to the store? We need a few things." She thrust a shopping list into my hands. "It'll give everyone a chance to calm down." I felt like a child being sent to my room, but I went. Maybe the fresh air would help me think clearly. 20 minutes later, I returned with the groceries. The sight that greeted me stopped me cold. Emily was sitting on the front steps, crying, surrounded by hastily packed bags and boxes, all our belongings. "Mommy!" She ran to me, sobbing. Aunt Sarah yelled at me. She said we had to get out, and when I started crying, she scared me and pushed all our stuff out here. Something snapped inside me. I stormed into the house. "How dare you?" I shouted. "How dare you treat my daughter like this?" "Erica, calm down," Dad started. "No, I will not calm down. For years, I've watched you favor Sarah. When Mike died, and I needed help with Emily, you couldn't be bothered. But Sarah snaps her fingers and you jump. I paid your bills, your loan, helped save your house, and this is how you repay me? By throwing my child out? Now listen here," Mom began. "No, you listen. I've spent my entire life being the responsible one, the reliable one, the one who's supposed to understand when Sarah needs something. I've given you everything, and you've given me nothing but scraps of attention when Sarah wasn't around to demand it all." I grabbed the grocery bags and hurled them across the room. Cans rolled across the floor, eggs cracked, and vegetables scattered everywhere. Mom gasped. Sarah smirked. Dad's face turned red with anger. Get out, he roared. Get out of our house and don't you dare come back. You're no daughter of ours, Mom added, her voice cold. We never want to see you again. I stood there, breathing hard, looking at these people who were supposed to be my family. Then I turned and walked out, closing the door on 28 years of trying to be good enough. Standing on the sidewalk that night, surrounded by hastily packed bags and boxes, I felt completely lost. Emily's small hand gripped mine tightly as tears rolled down her cheeks. I pulled out my phone with trembling hands, trying to think clearly. Our apartment was rented out for another year, and I couldn't just kick the tenants out. Legally, I needed to give them 3 months' notice. I called a nearby hotel first, then ordered an Uber XL to help with our bags. As Emily fell asleep in the hotel bed that night, I sat in the darkness with my laptop, searching for temporary apartments. The next morning, I found a furnished month-to-month rental about 15 minutes from my office. It wasn't perfect, but it would do. I called my tenants while Emily was eating breakfast. Hi, Lisa, I said to my tenant. I hate to do this, but I need to give you notice. Some family circumstances have changed. Lisa was understanding. Of course. We'll start looking right away. Take care, Erica. The next 3 months were strange. Our temporary apartment felt like living in limbo, not quite homeless, but not quite home either. Emily was quieter than usual, processing everything in her own way. Finally, after what felt like forever, Lisa called to say they'd found a new place. 3 months to the day after being thrown out of my parents' house, Emily and I walked back into our apartment. The moment I turned the key in the lock, something shifted inside me. This was our home. Our safe place. No drama, no favoritism, no walking on eggshells. We're home. Emily ran from room to room, rediscovering her old toys and books we'd left behind. That night, after Emily was asleep, I sat down and really looked at our finances. We were doing well, better than well, actually. Without supporting my parents, I had extra money each month. I opened a new savings account specifically for Emily's college fund and set up automatic monthly transfers. Over the next few weeks, we settled back into our old routine. Emily went back to her old school, where her friends welcomed her back with open arms. I threw myself into work, earning a promotion I'd been too distracted to pursue while living with my parents. 6 peaceful months passed. Emily and I had found our rhythm again: school, work, movie nights, weekend adventures. No drama, no guilt, no complicated family dynamics. Just us. Then came the knock at our door one Sunday morning. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I checked the peephole. My heart stopped. There stood my parents, and they were holding a baby. Against my better judgment, I opened the door. Erica, please, Mom started crying immediately. We need your help. Dad looked older than I remembered, more broken. Sarah, she's gone. They told me the whole story as they stood in my doorway. I hadn't invited them in. Sarah's husband had discovered she was cheating. A DNA test proved the baby wasn't his. He divorced her and refused any responsibility for the child. And Sarah? She dropped the baby with our parents and disappeared. We don't know where she is, Mom sobbed. She won't answer our calls. We can't do this alone, Erica. We need you to move back in. Help with the loan payments, help with the baby. I'm too old to care for an infant, Mom added, making that familiar tired face I'd seen so many times before. Please, sweetheart. We'll lose the house. I looked at them, really looked at them. Mom's manipulative tears. Dad's desperate eyes. The innocent baby in their arms. And suddenly, I saw everything with perfect clarity. No, I said quietly. What? Mom's tears stopped abruptly. I said no, I won't help you. Not this time. How can you be so heartless? Mom's voice rose, echoing through the hallway. Your own family. We'll be out on the street. They'll take our house. All because you're too selfish to help. Several neighbors' doors opened, curious faces peeking out. "You want to do this here, Mom? Fine." My voice was steady. "Let's talk about how you refused to help me when Mike died and I had a 3-month-old. Let's talk about how you mortgaged your house for Sarah's wedding. Let's talk about how Sarah abandoned you with that loan, just like she's abandoned her baby now. This isn't about me being heartless, this is about you finally facing the consequences of your choices." "How dare you," Dad started. "No, how dare you? You created this situation with your constant favoritism. You taught Sarah she could do whatever she wanted without consequences. And now you want me to clean up your mess again? Not happening. We're your parents," Mom wailed. "No," I said firmly. "You're Sarah's parents. You made that very clear the night you threw my daughter out on the street. Now please leave, and don't come back. Forget my address, forget my phone number, forget I exist, just like you did for most of my life." I closed the door on their protests and leaned against it, breathing hard. Through the door, I could hear Mom's continued screaming, but it didn't touch me anymore. "Mommy?" Emily stood in the hallway, watching me. "Are you okay?" I walked over and hugged her tight. "Yes, baby. I'm better than okay. I'm free." That was the last time I saw my parents. I don't know what happened to them or Sarah or the baby. Sometimes Emily asks about them, and I'm honest with her. I tell her that sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is walk away from people who hurt you, even if they're family. These days, our life is good. Emily is thriving in school, I love my job, and we're building the kind of life I always dreamed of, one based on real love, not obligation or manipulation. Sometimes, late at night, I look at old family photos and feel a twinge of sadness for what could have been. But then I look at Emily, growing up strong and secure in the knowledge that she is loved unconditionally, and I know I made the right choice. My name is Jennifer, and I've spent most of my life alone. My parents died in a car accident when I was just 5, leaving me to be raised by my grandmother. She was my everything, my anchor, my guide, my only family. When she passed away shortly before my wedding, I thought I'd found a new family in Mark, my then fiancé. We'd been married for 2 years, living in a beautiful 2-story townhouse I'd rented before our wedding. It was in a perfect location, and when we got married, it made sense to stay there. Mark moved his things in, and I genuinely believed we had the perfect setup. I worked from home as an assistant editor-in-chief at a major publishing house, which meant I could manage both my career and our home life effectively. "You know what's great about this house?" Mark would often say, sprawled on our couch after dinner. "It's big enough for family visits. My folks would love it here." I'd smile nervously whenever he brought this up. "Yeah, maybe," I'd reply, trying to hide my discomfort. The thought of house guests made me uneasy, but I never really expressed this to Mark. Everything changed the day his sister Sarah showed up unannounced with her 2 elementary school-aged kids, Tommy and Lisa. I still remember opening the door and seeing them standing there, luggage in hand. "Surprise!" Sarah exclaimed, pushing past me into the house. "The kids need some quality time with their uncle. You know, male influence and all that." I stood there, frozen, as her children, Tommy and Lisa, ran straight to our pristine living room with muddy shoes. Mark appeared behind me, beaming with joy. "Jen, isn't this great? The kids can stay in the guest room, and Sarah can take the office." "The office?" I stammered. "But that's where I work." "You can work anywhere, honey," he said, already carrying their bags upstairs. "It's just for the school holidays." That first night, as I lay awake listening to the chaos downstairs, Sarah's kids fighting over the TV remote, Sarah complaining about the dinner I'd made, I had no idea this was just the beginning. I couldn't have known that this moment would set in motion a series of events that would completely unravel my marriage. The next few weeks were absolute hell. Sarah's kids were completely out of control. I'd never seen children behave this way before, and I'd edited plenty of young adult books about troubled teens. "Hey, stupid lady," Tommy would yell at me across the breakfast table, his hands covered in what I hoped was just mud. "I want pancakes." "Tommy," I'd try to reason with him, "first, please wash your hands, and second, my name is Jennifer or Aunt Jen." "Whatever, dummy," Lisa would chime in, deliberately spilling her orange juice on the floor. "Mom says we don't have to listen to you because you're not really family." I'd look at Sarah, expecting her to correct them, but she'd just sit there scrolling through her phone, occasionally glancing up to say things like, "Kids will be kids," or "They're just expressing themselves." One particularly trying morning, I was trying to meet a crucial deadline for work when Sarah barged into my makeshift workspace in the living room. "The kids need lunch," she announced, as if I was her personal chef. "Something organic and sugar-free. Maybe some hand-pressed juice and gluten-free sandwiches?" "Sarah, I have a really important deadline," I started. "Oh please," she interrupted, rolling her eyes. "You just sit at home all day typing. That's not real work." Unlike being a mother. The days blurred together in an endless cycle of cooking, cleaning, and trying to salvage my work responsibilities. The kids would trash their rooms daily, wipe their dirty hands on the walls, and throw food during meals. The worst part? Mark seemed completely blind to it all. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the school holidays ended. The morning Sarah and the kids left, I took Mark aside for a serious conversation. "Mark, we need to talk about what just happened," I said, still exhausted from the ordeal. "What do you mean? It was great having them here," he replied, genuinely puzzled. "No, it wasn't. Your sister's kids were completely disrespectful, she didn't lift a finger to help, and I couldn't get any work done. Please, don't invite anyone else without discussing it with me first." Mark looked taken aback, but nodded. "Okay, honey, I promise I'll talk to you first next time." I spent the next few weeks trying to restore both our home and my mental health. The walls needed repainting, the furniture required deep cleaning, and my work deadlines had piled up dangerously high. During this time, I also remembered something important about our lease agreement. "Mark," I said one evening, "I should mention that our landlord is really strict about guests. The agreement has specific clauses about it." He waved his hand dismissively. "Don't worry about that. Actually, why don't we just put the lease in my name? That way, you won't have to stress about it anymore." We transferred the lease to his name the next day, though I continued to pay the rent from my account as usual. 6 months passed, and life had finally returned to normal. Or so I thought. I was catching up on work one Tuesday morning when I heard Mark's excited voice from the kitchen. "Of course you can stay with us, Mom. We have plenty of room. You and Dad can take the master bedroom. We'll move downstairs to the guest room." My stomach dropped. I rushed to the kitchen just in time to hear his mother saying something about sewage repairs and water being cut off at their house. "Mark," I whispered urgently, tugging at his sleeve. "Can we talk about this first?" He covered the phone with his hand. "Mom and Dad need a place to stay while their plumbing gets fixed." "What's there to talk about?" That evening, we had our first real fight in months. "You promised me, Mark. You promised we'd discuss these things together." "What do you want me to do, Jen?" he snapped. "They're my parents. I can't leave them without running water. Stop being so selfish." The next morning, my in-laws arrived with enough luggage to survive an apocalypse. Within hours, my mother-in-law, Linda, had rearranged my kitchen cabinets, criticized my choice of cleaning products, and commented on the layer of dust on the windowsills. "Jennifer, dear," she called from the living room, where she was directing her husband Bob about furniture placement. "When you're done with whatever it is you do on that computer, we'll need dinner. Something substantial, not those silly salads you make." I gritted my teeth. "Linda, I'm actually working right now. I have a deadline." "Working?" she laughed, looking at Bob. "Sitting at home all day isn't work. Now, about dinner." Days blurred together. I'd try to write emails while Linda stood over my shoulder, commenting on my posture. I'd be editing manuscripts while she demanded I do the laundry properly. Apparently, I'd been folding sheets wrong my entire adult life. "Mark," I pleaded one evening, "I need help. I can't keep up with everything." "You're right," he said, and for a moment, I felt relief. "I should take some time off work." I smiled, grateful, until he added, "Dad and I are thinking about a fishing trip. Get some real father-son bonding time." "A fishing trip?" I couldn't believe my ears. "That's not what I meant." But he was already packing his gear, excited as a kid at Christmas. The next morning, he and Bob left for their bonding experience, leaving me alone with Linda. "Well," she said, hands on her hips as the door closed behind them. "Since you're not busy with that little computer job of yours, we can finally get this house properly organized." I looked at my laptop, where 3 urgent emails from my boss sat unanswered, then at Linda's determined face. In that moment, I realized something had fundamentally shifted in my marriage, and not for the better. Just when I thought things couldn't get worse, only a day after Mark and his father left for their fishing trip, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Sarah standing there with Tommy and Lisa, surrounded by even more luggage than last time. "Surprise!" She pushed past me, kids in tow. "The children have been crying for their grandparents. We couldn't stay away." I stood in the doorway, my mind refusing to process what was happening. Linda appeared behind me, squealing with delight. "My babies!" She hugged the children. "Sarah, darling, you're just in time." Jennifer was about to start dinner. I wasn't about to start dinner. I was about to join a critical video call with my publishing team. But nobody cared about that. "Actually, I started, I have an important work meeting." Always with the excuses, Sarah rolled her eyes. "Mom told me you just sit at that computer all day pretending to work." The next few days were absolute torture. While Mark and Bob were off enjoying their fishing trip, I was trapped in a house of chaos. The kids ran wild through every room, leaving destruction in their wake. Sarah spent her days video calling friends, complaining about my cooking. Linda criticized everything I did. Nobody lifted a finger to help, but they all had opinions about how I wasn't doing enough. When Mark and his father finally returned from their fishing trip 5 days later, I was ready for a serious conversation. I'd rehearsed it in my head, firm but fair, explaining how impossible the situation had become. But before I could get a word in, Mark burst through the door, beaming with joy. "Isn't this amazing?" He spread his arms wide, taking in the chaos of our once peaceful home. "The whole family together. We should do this more often." I felt the room spin. "More often?" "Yeah. Dad and I were talking while fishing, and you know what would be great? If we all lived together for a while. Like a real family." The children ran past us, tracking mud across the floor I'd just cleaned. Sarah yelled from upstairs about needing fresh towels. Linda appeared to remind me it was almost dinner time. "Mark," I managed to choke out, "can we talk privately?" "Later, honey," he waved me off. Dad's showing everyone the pictures from our trip. That night, I lay awake in our cramped guest room, listening to the chaos above. Our bedroom, now occupied by his parents, creaked with every movement. Sarah's kids were still running around despite the late hour. Someone was using the microwave. Again. My phone buzzed with another email from my boss, "Second missed deadline this week. We need to talk." My life had become a nightmare. I was surrounded by strangers who treated me like their personal maid, children who destroyed everything they touched, and a husband who couldn't, or wouldn't, see what was happening. The next morning, I woke up early, determined to get some work done before everyone else got up. I'd started barricading myself in the home office, my last sanctuary in this chaos. But when I opened the door, my heart sank. Sarah was sitting at my desk, my laptop open in front of her, while Tommy and Lisa sprawled on the floor surrounded by construction paper, glue, and what looked like half the garden's worth of dirt. "Oh good, you're up." Sarah didn't even look at me. "The kids have a school project due tomorrow. We're using your laptop for research." That's my work laptop, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I have deadlines. Don't be so selfish, Sarah cut me off. This is for their education. You can do your little typing job later. I found Mark in the kitchen, grabbing his briefcase for work. Mark, they've taken over my office. They're using my laptop. I can't work. Not now, Jen, he rushed past me, checking his watch. I'm late for a meeting. Just share the laptop, okay? It's for the kids' school. Feeling dizzy, I headed to the bathroom. Maybe a shower would help me think clearly. But when I opened the bathroom door, I nearly vomited. The toilet was overflowing with mud and dirt. Footprints tracked through the mess across the tile floor. Handprints decorated the walls. Oh yeah, Lisa's voice piped up behind me. We needed somewhere to mix the dirt for our project. Tommy said the toilet would be good, 'cause it has water already. I stood there, staring at the destruction. Somewhere in the house, I could hear Linda complaining about lunch plans. Sarah was yelling at the kids to get more supplies for their project. The toilet gurgled ominously. Something inside me snapped. Without saying a word, I cleaned up the bathroom. Every swipe of the mop, every scrub of the walls felt like another nail in the coffin of my marriage. When I finished, I went to our bedroom, the guest room now, and looked around at what my life had become. The next morning, I waited until Mark left for work. I listened to his car pull out of the driveway, counted to 60, then moved with quiet efficiency. I packed a small bag, some clothes, toiletries, my phone charger. The only thing I really needed was my laptop, which I managed to recover from the office while Sarah was in the kitchen complaining about the breakfast I hadn't made. Nobody noticed when I slipped out the front door. Nobody called out to ask where I was going. The hotel I checked into wasn't fancy, but it had 3 things my house no longer offered: silence, privacy, and peace. For the first time in weeks, I could hear myself think. I took the longest shower of my life, ordered room service, and actually managed to get some work done. I kept expecting my phone to explode with messages. Surely Mark would notice I was gone. Surely he'd be worried. Surely someone would wonder where the person who did all the cooking and cleaning had disappeared to. But as the hours ticked by, my phone remained silent. No missed calls. No frantic text messages. No concern at all for where I'd gone or why. After 3 days of silence, I decided to go home. Not because I missed them, but because I needed answers. As I approached our front door, I heard music and laughter spilling out into the street. What I walked into felt like a punch to the gut. A full-blown party was in progress. Streamers hung from the ceiling, plates of food covered every surface, and dozens of unfamiliar faces filled our living room. Nobody noticed me slip inside. Through the crowd, I spotted Mark dancing with Sarah in the middle of the room, both of them laughing. More relatives I'd never met were sprawled across our furniture, drinking and chatting as if they owned the place. I moved through the party like a ghost, until I found myself near the kitchen. That's when I heard them. And the best part is, my mother-in-law was saying to a woman I didn't recognize, we didn't have to spend a dime on hotels or restaurants. No repairs needed at our house at all, we just needed a change of scenery. The woman chuckled. Clever. And you got a free housewife out of the deal too. Yes, that Jennifer, Linda's voice dripped with contempt. Though she's not much of a housewife. Always complaining about her work. Can you believe she actually ran away 3 days ago? Not that anyone misses her cooking. They burst into laughter. I stood frozen, their words hitting me like physical blows. It had all been a lie. The broken sewage system, the urgent repairs, all of it fabricated so they could have a free vacation at my expense. Something inside me snapped. I pushed through the crowd until I found Mark, still dancing and drinking without a care in the world. We need to talk, I grabbed his arm. Now. He followed me to the hallway, looking annoyed at being pulled away from his fun. Your mother just told everyone there were never any repairs needed at their house, I said, my voice shaking. They just wanted a free place to stay. Did you know about this? He shrugged, and in that casual gesture, I saw our entire marriage crumble. So what if I did? Their family, they needed a break. A break? I'm the one who cooked for them, cleaned for them, while they insulted me and took over my home. And you knew it was all a lie? Oh, stop being so dramatic, he sneered. You don't understand because you're an orphan. The word orphan hit me like a slap. Images flashed through my mind, the car accident that took my parents when I was 5, my grandmother raising me alone, her empty seat at our wedding. That's right, he continued, his voice cruel. You're just a lonely loser who doesn't understand what it means to have a real, close-knit family. Maybe if you had one, you wouldn't be such a selfish bitch. Tears burned in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Without a word, I walked to our former bedroom and gathered what remained of my belongings. Behind me, the party continued as if nothing had happened. No one tried to stop me. Not even Mark. I'd barely settled into my hotel room and started apartment hunting online when my phone rang. Seeing the landlord's number flash across my screen made my stomach clench. Jennifer, Mr. Peterson's voice was tight with tension. I've been receiving numerous complaints from the neighbors about your property. My former property, I corrected him. I don't live there anymore. The lease was transferred to Mark Thompson, my husband, remember? There was a heavy pause on the line. Yes, well. The neighbors are reporting loud parties, excessive noise at all hours, children running wild in the common areas, and multiple unauthorized residents. That sounds terrible, I said, keeping my voice neutral. But as I said, it's not my responsibility anymore. Mr. Peterson sighed deeply. I want you to know that I'll be forced to take the harshest measures allowed under the lease agreement. I'm only calling you as a courtesy because you were such a good tenant for so long. I appreciate the heads up, I replied, but you'll need to discuss this with Mark. After hanging up, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. I didn't bother warning Mark about the call. Let him deal with the consequences of his choices for once. I found a lovely one-bedroom apartment in a quiet building across town. The landlady was a retired teacher who lived downstairs and appreciated that I worked from home. It's good to have someone around during the day, she said. For the first time in weeks, I slept through the night without being awakened by midnight snacks or early morning chaos. Then, 2 weeks into my peaceful new life, Mark called. Jen, we're in serious trouble, he blurted before I could speak. Peterson showed up today with a stack of papers. He's demanding double rent for the month, plus some ridiculous fine. I continued typing my email, letting him ramble. Did you know it was against the lease to have overnight guests? Or parties? Why didn't you tell me? I did tell you, I replied calmly. Multiple times. You didn't want to listen. Well, I didn't read the whole thing when we transferred it, he admitted. Look, can you talk to Peterson? He liked you. Maybe you can explain. Explain what? I cut him off. That you moved your entire extended family into a rental property without permission? That you've been hosting parties and disturbing the neighbors? That you ignored every warning I gave you about the lease agreement? The neighbors called the police last night, he continued desperately. Mom and Dad got fined for noise violations. Sarah's kids were running through the building at midnight and someone complained. We need your help, Jen. You know how to handle these things. I thought about all the times I'd handled things for them. All the times I'd cleaned up their messes, literal and figurative. No, I said simply. No? What do you mean, no? I mean no. You have a whole big, close-knit family there to help you. Remember? The real family you said I wouldn't understand because I'm just a lonely orphan? Goodbye, Mark. I hung up mid-plea, turned my phone off, and went back to work. For the first time in months, I smiled. Sometimes karma doesn't need any help at all. The day after Mark's desperate call about the fines, my phone rang again. His name flashed on the screen, and I almost didn't answer. But something told me I should hear whatever he had to say. "They're gone," he said without preamble. "Mom, Dad, Sarah, the kids, they all left. Come home, Jen. We can go back to how things were." I almost laughed at the suggestion. Go back? As if the past months could be erased like crayon marks from a wall. "There's no going back, Mark. Please," his voice cracked. "Peterson's asking for so much money. Maybe we could split the costs? Half the fine and the double rent? I can't afford it on my own." This time I did laugh, a sharp, bitter sound that surprised even me. "Oh, now you want to split things fairly? Where was this concern for fairness when I was cooking and cleaning for your entire family? When they took over my office, my home, my life? But what about your real, close-knit family?" I interrupted. "Surely they'll help you pay. After all, I'm just a lonely orphan who doesn't understand family values, remember?" A week later, I heard through our mutual friend Amy that Peterson had evicted Mark. She told me he'd shown up at his parents' doorstep with his bags, only to be turned away. The irony was almost poetic. Mark's final call came as I was finishing dinner in my peaceful new apartment. My divorce papers lay on the coffee table, filed that morning. "Please, Jen," he begged. "I've lost everything, the house, my family. I made a mistake. We could start over. I've learned my lesson." I looked around my small but tranquil apartment. My laptop sat on my desk where I'd left it. My coffee mug was exactly where I'd placed it. No crayon on the walls, no mud on the floors, no chaos in the kitchen. "You're right about one thing, Mark," I said quietly. "You did lose everything. But you lost it yourself, one choice at a time. Every time you chose your family over our marriage. Every time you dismissed my feelings. Every time you watched them disrespect me and said nothing. I can change. I've already filed for divorce," I cut him off. "And no, this isn't up for discussion. You showed me exactly who you are and what I mean to you. Consider it a gift, now I'll never waste another moment wondering." I hung up and blocked his number. Outside my window, the sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. On my desk, a fresh manuscript waited for my attention. My phone remained blessedly silent. Sometimes, I think about what my grandmother would say if she could see me now. She always told me that family isn't about blood, it's about love, respect, and loyalty. She was right, of course. She usually was. I might be an orphan, as Mark so cruelly pointed out, but I finally understood something important: being alone isn't the same as being lonely. And sometimes, the family you're born with or marry into isn't the family you deserve. Sometimes, you have to save yourself. And that's exactly what I did. My name's Deborah, and let me paint you a picture of my family. There's my mom, Karen, yeah, fitting name, I know. She's all about her career and freedom. Then there's my dad, Tom, who's about as useful as a screen door on a submarine when it comes to parenting. My sister, Jessica, is 14 years older than me and couldn't care less about my existence. I came into this world as an unwelcome surprise. Mom was 42 when she found out she was pregnant with me. She thought it was menopause at first. Guess the universe has a twisted sense of humor. When she finally dragged herself to the doctor, it was too late to take care of it, if you catch my drift. From what I pieced together over the years, it went something like this. "Tom, what the hell are we going to do?" Mom probably screeched, pacing around their bedroom. Dad, being the spineless wonder he is, probably just shrugged. "I don't know, Karen. Maybe we should talk to my dad?" And that's how Grandpa Joe got roped into this mess. He's loaded and lives in Canada, but he flew down to play peacemaker. "Karen, Tom, listen," he must have said, all calm and collected. "I know this isn't what you planned, but it's happening. I'll help you out financially. Just give this child a chance. Mom, being the career-obsessed woman she is, probably huffed and puffed before finally agreeing. Fine. But I'm not letting this kid derail my life. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is how I, Deborah, came to be. Born premature, with a whole host of health problems, and into a family that saw me as nothing more than an inconvenience. My early days were spent more in the hospital than at home. Mom couldn't be bothered to show up most of the time. It was Dad and Aunt Sarah who took turns keeping watch over my incubator. Aunt Sarah, now there's a saint if I ever met one. No kids or husband of her own, she latched onto me like a lifeline. While my own mother was probably off closing deals and climbing the corporate ladder, Aunt Sarah was there, holding my tiny hand through the incubator's holes, whispering words of encouragement. When I finally got to go home, Grandpa Joe swooped in again. Our house wasn't big enough for 2 kids, apparently. So, he bought us a new one. Growing up in that house was like living in a museum. Look, but don't touch. Don't make noise. Don't exist too loudly. I learned pretty damn quick that I wasn't part of the exhibit, just some unwanted artifact they couldn't get rid of. Mom and Dad were always working. When they weren't, they acted like I was some kind of leech, sucking the life out of them. We had a parade of nannies coming through the house. Some were nice, some weren't, but none of them stuck around long enough to matter. Jessica, my so-called sister, might as well have been a stranger living in the same house. 14 years is a hell of an age gap, and she made it clear she had no interest in playing big sister. I remember one time, I must have been about 6, I tried to hang out in her room while she was getting ready for college. "Jessica, can I watch you do your makeup?" I asked, peering around her doorframe. She barely glanced at me. "No, Deborah. I'm busy. Go play with your toys or something." "But I don't want to play alone," I whined. "Can't we do something together?" She slammed her mascara down on the dresser and whirled to face me. "Look, we're not friends, okay? I'm not here to entertain you. Go bother Mom or Dad." That was pretty much the extent of our sisterly bonding. Mom was even worse. Every day when she got home from work, it was the same routine. She'd walk in, kick off her heels, and make a beeline for the liquor cabinet. "Mom," I'd call out, excited to see her. "Can we play a game? Or read a story?" She'd pour herself a large glass of wine and sigh heavily. "For God's sake, Deborah. Can't you see I need some peace and quiet? Go to your room and play by yourself. You're old enough to entertain yourself." And Dad? He'd promised Mom he'd take care of me if she had me. What a joke that turned out to be. He was always too busy or too tired to spend time with me. His favorite phrase became, "Not now, Deborah." I remember overhearing them argue about it once. I was supposed to be in bed, but I'd snuck out to get a glass of water. "Tom, you promised you'd help with her," Mom hissed. "I can't do this all on my own." "What do you want from me, Karen?" Dad shot back. "I work all day too. I'm exhausted when I get home." She's always so needy. I didn't stick around to hear the rest. I'd heard enough to know where I stood in their eyes, a burden, an obligation, a mistake they were stuck with. After a while, I stopped trying. What was the point? I learned to entertain myself, to be quiet, to stay out of their way. I became a ghost in my own home, drifting from room to room, trying not to disturb the real family. The only bright spot in my life was Aunt Sarah. She lived nearby, and I started spending more and more time at her place. Weekends, holidays, any chance I got, really. With Aunt Sarah, I felt seen, heard, loved even. We'd spend hours doing puzzles, baking cookies, or just talking. She'd ask me about school, my friends, my hopes and dreams. Things my own parents never bothered with. Life has a funny way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. I was 14, minding my own business, trying to survive another day in the emotional wasteland I called home, when my parents dropped a bombshell on me. "Deborah," Mom said, her voice unusually chipper. "We have wonderful news. Your sister Jessica is getting married, and she's pregnant. Dad chimed in, grinning like an idiot. We're going to be grandparents. I forced a smile, wondering why the hell they were telling me this like I should be jumping for joy. That's great, I managed to say. We're going to be very busy preparing for the wedding, Mom continued, not even noticing my lack of enthusiasm. So, we want you to stay with your Aunt Sarah for a while. I blinked, processing their words. They wanted to ship me off? Because of a wedding? Part of me wanted to be hurt, but honestly? It was the best news I'd heard in years. Sure, I said, trying not to sound too eager. I'd love to stay with Aunt Sarah. They looked relieved, probably expecting me to put up a fight. Shows how little they knew me. I packed my bags faster than you could say unwanted child and practically skipped to Aunt Sarah's house. Months flew by. The wedding preparations were in full swing, but I couldn't care less. I was too busy enjoying my new life. Aunt Sarah and I would cook together, watch movies, go for walks in the park. She'd help me with my homework, listen to me ramble about my day at school, and actually seemed interested in what I had to say. Before I knew it, a week before Jessica's wedding rolled around. It was also my 15th birthday. That morning, I woke up to the smell of pancakes and the sound of Aunt Sarah singing off-key in the kitchen. I grinned, padding downstairs in my pajamas. Happy birthday, my dear, Aunt Sarah exclaimed, pulling me into a bone-crushing hug. I've got a surprise for you. She handed me a beautifully wrapped box. It's from your grandfather, he sent it yesterday. I tore into the wrapping paper, my eyes widening as I revealed a brand new smartphone, the latest model, no less. I dialed Grandpa Joe's number, my heart racing with excitement. Hello, birthday girl, his warm voice filled the line. Do you like your present? Like it? Grandpa, I love it. Thank you so much. We chatted for a bit, and then he asked the question I'd been dreading. So, how did your parents congratulate you? I hesitated, not wanting to admit the truth. Oh, I haven't seen them yet. I was planning to go home soon, actually. I'm sure they'll say something then. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then, I see. Well, why don't you do a live broadcast when you go? I'd love to share in the joy. With a mixture of hope and dread churning in my stomach, I made my way back to my parents' house. The walk felt both too long and too short. As I turned onto our street, I took a deep breath and started the live broadcast on my new phone. Hey, Grandpa, I said, trying to sound cheerful. I'm on my way to see Mom and Dad now. Thanks again for the awesome phone. I chatted away as I walked, filling the silence with babble about my morning with Aunt Sarah and how excited I was about my birthday. But as I approached our house, a sense of unease crept over me. Well, here we are, I announced to the camera, climbing the front steps. I hesitated for a moment before pushing open the door. Mom? Dad? I'm home. Silence greeted me. The house felt eerily quiet, almost abandoned. I frowned, panning the camera around the empty living room. Guess they're not down here, I muttered, more to myself than to Grandpa. I'll check upstairs. I climbed the stairs, my footsteps echoing in the quiet house. As I reached the top, I noticed something odd. The door to my room was closed, which was unusual. I always left it open when I wasn't home. That's weird, I said, reaching for the doorknob. My door's never closed. I pushed it open and froze. The room that greeted me was not my room. At least, not anymore. The walls, once a soft lavender, were now a pale blue. My posters were gone, replaced by cutesy animal prints. My bed had vanished, and in its place stood a white crib. What the hell? I gasped, stumbling backward. The phone nearly slipped from my grasp as I spun around, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. This can't be right. This is my room. Just then, I heard a door open behind me. I whirled around to see my parents emerging from their bedroom, looking startled to see me. Deborah? Mom said, her eyes darting between me and the phone in my hand. What are you doing here? I barely registered her words, still reeling from the shock of my transformed room. What happened to my room? I demanded. Why is it blue? Where's all my stuff? Dad cleared his throat, looking uncomfortable. Well, you see, Deborah, we've decided to give this room to your sister's baby. Our first grandson. Mom nodded, a smile plastering itself across her face. Yes, isn't it wonderful? Jessica's having a boy, the son your father's always dreamed of having. He'll be living here with us after the wedding. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. But where am I supposed to sleep? Where's my stuff? Oh, we packed up your things, Dad said, waving his hand dismissively. They're in boxes downstairs. You should take them with you when you leave. We don't want them cluttering up the place. I stared at them, unable to comprehend what I was hearing. Leave? What do you mean, leave? This is my home. Mom's smile faltered for a moment before she forced it back into place. Deborah, dear, you have to understand. With Jessica and her husband moving in, and the baby on the way, well, there's just no room for you here anymore. I stood there, frozen in disbelief, my mind reeling from what I'd just heard. Suddenly, a surge of anger welled up inside me, pushing through the shock. No, I said, my voice shaking. No, I won't leave. This is my home too. You can't just throw me out like I'm nothing. Mom's fake smile vanished, replaced by a look of irritation. For heaven's sake, Deborah. Don't be difficult. Difficult? I spat back. It's my birthday, and you're kicking me out. You didn't even remember, did you? Dad rolled his eyes. Your birthday? Is that what this tantrum is about? We don't have time for this nonsense. Their callousness hit me like a physical blow. I felt tears welling up in my eyes, but I blinked them back furiously. How can you be so cruel? I'm your daughter. A daughter we never wanted. Mom snapped, her composure finally cracking. Do you have any idea how much you've cost us? How much attention you've demanded? We're exhausted, Deborah. Dad nodded, his face twisted with annoyance. We didn't want a second child. You were a mistake, an accident. And now, we finally have a chance at the family we always wanted. Their words cut deep, each one a knife to my heart. I watched in stunned silence as they grabbed the bags they'd packed with my belongings and started shoving them out the front door. There, Mom said, dusting off her hands. Now take your things and go to your precious Aunt Sarah. She loves you so much, let her deal with you. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. This couldn't be happening. It had to be a nightmare. What are you waiting for? Dad barked. Get out. We have a wedding to prepare for, and we don't need you here complicating things. That's when the dam broke. Tears streamed down my face as the full weight of their rejection crashed over me. How could you do this to me? I sobbed. I'm your child. Stop it, Mom hissed, glancing nervously at the windows. You're embarrassing us. The neighbors will hear. Good, I shouted through my tears. Let them hear. Let everyone know what kind of people you really are. Dad grabbed my arm, his fingers digging in painfully. That's enough, he growled, practically dragging me to the door. Get out, now. And don't come back. With one final shove, I found myself on the front porch, my bags scattered around me. The door slammed shut behind me with a finality that echoed in my bones. I don't know how long I sat there, sobbing on the steps. Eventually, I gathered my things and started the long, miserable walk back to Aunt Sarah's. The bags felt impossibly heavy, weighed down by more than just my possessions. As I trudged along, sniffling and wiping my eyes, a familiar voice suddenly cut through my misery. Deborah, can you hear me? I jumped, looking around wildly before realizing the voice was coming from my phone. With a jolt of horror, I remembered the live broadcast. Grandpa had seen everything. Grandpa? I stammered, lifting the phone with trembling hands. "Oh, sweetheart," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm so sorry you had to go through that. Look, we'll sort this out, I promise. For now, go to Sarah's. We'll see each other at the wedding in a few days, okay? Try to enjoy your birthday." Somehow, his words managed to calm me down a little. By the time I reached Aunt Sarah's, my tears had mostly subsided. She took one look at me, standing there with my bags and puffy eyes, and pulled me into a fierce hug. Aunt Sarah, bless her heart, insisted we celebrate my birthday properly. She let me invite a few friends over, baked a cake, and did her best to make the day special. The day of Jessica's wedding arrived. I hadn't been invited, of course, but Aunt Sarah insisted we go anyway. So there I was, decked out in my best dress, feeling like an imposter as we walked into the reception hall. I spotted Grandpa Joe almost immediately. He was sitting at a table near the front, his back ramrod straight, radiating an energy that made me nervous. Before we even had time to say hello, the newlyweds made their grand entrance. Jessica looked radiant in her white gown, beaming as she clung to her new husband's arm. Mom and Dad followed, pride evident in their faces, and I felt a pang in my chest. The reception progressed with toasts, dinner, and the usual festivities. As the congratulatory speeches began during the festive dinner, Grandpa Joe suddenly stood up. "I have something to say," he announced, his voice ringing out across the hall. Every head turned. Jessica and her groom looked confused. Mom and Dad went pale. Grandpa Joe marched to the front of the room, commandeering the microphone from the stunned best man. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "I apologize for interrupting this joyous occasion, but there's a grave injustice that needs to be addressed." He then launched into a detailed account of how my parents had treated me. He spared no detail, from their resentment of my birth to the cruel way they'd kicked me out on my birthday. With each word, the guests' expressions changed from confusion to shock to outrage. Mom tried to interrupt, her face beet red. Jessica was crying now, mascara running down her cheeks. Her new husband looked uncomfortable, shifting in his seat. The guests were whispering among themselves, shooting scandalized looks at my parents. Grandpa turned to face my parents directly, his voice cold as ice. "So let me make this clear. I'm changing my will. Every cent I have will go to Sarah and Deborah. Tom, Karen, Jessica, you're cut off. Completely." The reception hall erupted into chaos. Mom let out a strangled cry, Dad's face turned an alarming shade of purple. Jessica wailed something about her ruined wedding. But Grandpa wasn't done. He walked over to where Aunt Sarah and I sat, shell-shocked by the spectacle. "Come on, girls," he said gently. "We're leaving. We don't need to stay where we're not wanted." In a daze, I stood up and followed him. As we walked towards the exit, I could feel every eye on me. Some looked sympathetic, others judgmental. I kept my gaze fixed on Grandpa's back, willing myself not to cry. The morning after the wedding disaster, I woke up to the sound of insistent knocking on Aunt Sarah's front door. Bleary-eyed and still processing the events of the previous day, I stumbled downstairs to find Mom and Dad on the porch, looking a strange mix of desperate and contrite. "Deborah, sweetie," Mom cooed, her voice sickeningly sweet. "We need to talk. We want you to come home, honey. We're so sorry about everything. We love you, we really do." I felt a surge of anger rising in my chest. "Love me? You kicked me out. You said I was a mistake." They launched into a litany of apologies and explanations, each one more pathetic than the last. But as I stood there, listening to their desperate pleas, a realization hit me like a ton of bricks. This wasn't about me at all. "This is about the inheritance, isn't it?" I said, cutting off Dad mid-sentence. Their faces fell, confirming my suspicions. They didn't want me back, they wanted Grandpa's money. "Get out," I said, my voice shaking with anger. "I don't want to see either of you ever again." I slammed the door in their faces, leaning against it as I tried to calm my racing heart. But my parents weren't done. Over the next few days, they showed up repeatedly, each time more insistent than the last. They called, they sent emails, they even tried to rope in other family members to convince me. It all came to a head about a week after the wedding. I was home alone when I heard a commotion outside. To my horror, I saw Mom and Dad trying to force their way past Aunt Sarah, who had just returned from the grocery store. "She's our daughter," Dad was yelling. "You can't keep her from us." Something in me snapped. I'd had enough of their manipulation, their lies, their sudden concern for my well-being now that money was on the line. "Aunt Sarah," I called out, my voice steadier than I felt. "I want you to be my legal guardian." The words hung in the air for a moment. Then Aunt Sarah's face broke into a wide smile. "Oh, sweetie, I'd be honored." With Aunt Sarah's help, we contacted a lawyer the very next day. The process wasn't easy. There were forms to fill out, interviews to conduct, and a court hearing to attend. But through it all, I held on to one piece of evidence that I knew would make all the difference: the video from my ill-fated birthday visit home. The day of the court hearing arrived, and I felt sick to my stomach. My parents were there, of course, playing the role of concerned, loving parents to the hilt. But when the judge asked for evidence, and we played that video, the one where they kicked me out, where they told me I was unwanted, the atmosphere in the courtroom changed. I'll never forget the look on the judge's face as she watched my parents callously toss me aside. When the video ended, she turned to them, her expression hard. "In all my years on the bench," she said, "I've rarely seen such a clear case of parental neglect and emotional abuse." The ruling came swiftly after that. Aunt Sarah was granted full legal guardianship, and my parents' rights were terminated. As the gavel came down, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. For the first time in my life, I was free of their toxic influence. Life has a funny way of coming full circle. Just when I thought the drama was finally over, Grandpa Joe called us over to his lawyer's office. As we sat in the plush leather chairs, surrounded by mahogany bookshelves and the smell of old paper, I couldn't help but feel nervous. "Deborah, Sarah," Grandpa began, his voice solemn but his eyes twinkling, "I want you both to know that I've made some changes to my will." He nodded to his lawyer, who pulled out a thick document. "As I promised at the wedding," Grandpa continued, "I've decided to leave my entire estate to you two. Tom and Karen are officially disinherited." I sat there, stunned. I knew Grandpa had threatened this at the wedding, but I never really believed he'd go through with it. As we left the lawyer's office, my head spinning with the implications of what had just happened, my phone rang. It was Jessica. "How could you do this to me?" she screeched as soon as I answered. "You've ruined everything." I pulled the phone away from my ear, wincing at her volume. "What are you talking about?" "Don't play dumb," she snapped. "You turned Grandpa against us. Now he's leaving everything to you and Aunt Sarah. It's not fair. I want my share too." I felt a flash of anger. After everything that had happened, after the way they'd all treated me, she had the nerve to demand money? "Look, Jessica," I said, trying to keep my voice level, "I didn't ask for any of this. It was Grandpa's decision, not mine." "But you must have manipulated him somehow," she insisted. "You've always been jealous of me. This is your revenge, isn't it?" I took a deep breath, counting to 10 in my head before responding. "Jessica, I'm sorry you feel that way. But I had nothing to do with Grandpa's decision. If you want to change his mind, you'll have to talk to him yourself." "Maybe I will," she huffed. "And don't think this is over, Deborah. You can't just waltz in and steal what's rightfully ours." As she hung up, I felt a mix of emotions, anger, sadness, but mostly just exhaustion. And then I decided to focus on my future. I threw myself into my studies, determined to ace my exams and get into a good college. Aunt Sarah helped me research schools, majors, and scholarship opportunities. Sure, my family situation was far from perfect. There would probably be more drama with Jessica, my parents, and the inheritance down the line. But for now, I had a loving home with Aunt Sarah and Grandpa Joe, a bright future ahead of me, and the strength to face whatever challenges came my way. I'm Kelly, and John and I met right after I finished college. He swept me off my feet with his charm and ambition. Before I knew it, we were married and living in the apartment he'd bought before our wedding. It wasn't anything fancy, but it was ours, and I loved every bit of it. Our daughter Sarah came along soon after. She was perfect, John's blue eyes and my curly hair. I thought we had it all, a loving family, a cozy home, and promising careers ahead of us. I landed a job as a secretary at a small but growing company. The pay wasn't great, but I enjoyed the work and got along well with my coworkers. John, on the other hand, was making his way up at his construction firm. He'd come home with stories of big projects and even bigger deals. I was proud of him, even if his long hours meant I was often alone with Sarah. But something changed in John over time. He'd come home late, eyes narrowed with suspicion. Who called, he'd demand, or why were you all dressed up? At first, I laughed it off, but soon his jealousy became suffocating. One night, after he'd grilled me about a work event, I confronted him. You think I'm cheating? With who, John? The mailman? He didn't crack a smile. Don't play dumb, Kelly. I see how men look at you. And that boss of yours is happily married with 3 kids, I cut him off. For God's sake, John, I'm your wife. I love you. But my words fell on deaf ears. The arguments became more frequent, each one chipping away at our marriage. I was faithful, always had been, always would be. But John's distrust was like a poison, seeping into every part of our lives. Through it all, Sarah remained blissfully unaware. At 10 years old, her world revolved around school, friends, and her iPad. I tried to shield her from our fights, but kids always know more than we think. The irony wasn't lost on me. John was the one always coming home late, always going on business trips. If anyone had reason to be suspicious, it was me. But I trusted him. I believed in our vows, in our love. Why couldn't he do the same? One night, after a particularly nasty fight, I found myself staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. John's soft snores filled the room, but I felt miles away from him. How had we gotten here? When had love turned to suspicion, trust to accusation? I thought about leaving, about taking Sarah and starting over. But where would we go? What kind of life could I give her on a secretary's salary? And despite everything, I still loved John. I loved the man he used to be, the man I hoped he could be again. Just when I thought things couldn't get more complicated, life threw me another curveball. My mom, the rock I'd always leaned on, had a stroke. It hit out of nowhere, leaving us all reeling. Mom had always been the picture of health. After Dad died, she'd thrown herself into gardening and book clubs, determined to live life to the fullest. She lived in this gorgeous house in the fancy part of town, courtesy of Dad's life insurance and smart investments. I used to joke that she was living the life of a retired movie star. But that Tuesday morning changed everything. I got the call at work. Mom couldn't speak, couldn't move her left side. I rushed to the hospital, my heart in my throat. The next few weeks were a blur of hospitals, doctors, and terrifying medical jargon. I went to every top-notch clinic in the area, desperate for someone to tell me Mom would be okay. But the prognosis wasn't good. The stroke had left her bedridden, needing round-the-clock care. I was overwhelmed. How could I take care of Mom, manage my job, look after Sarah, and deal with John's jealousy all at once? It felt like drowning in slow motion. Then, out of the blue, John came up with an idea. We should move into your mom's house, he said one night over dinner. I nearly choked on my pasta. What? Think about it, Kelly, he continued, his eyes lighting up. It's a great house in a fantastic neighborhood. Sarah would have her own room, maybe even a playroom. Your mom needs care, and you'd be right there. Plus, we could rent out this apartment for some extra cash. I had to admit, it made sense. Mom's house was way nicer than our apartment, and the idea of not having to commute to take care of her was appealing. But still, it felt weird. I don't know, John, I hesitated. It's Mom's house. We can't just barge in. Ask her, he insisted. I bet she'd love the company. It's better than a nursing home, right? He had a point there. Mom had made it crystal clear she didn't want to end up in a glorified prison for old people, as she called it. Maybe this could work. The next day, I broached the subject with Mom. To my surprise, her face lit up at the idea. Oh, Kelly, she said, her voice weak but excited. I'd love that. This old house needs some life in it again. And just like that, it was decided. We were moving into Mom's house. As I started packing up our apartment, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was the beginning of something big. I just didn't know if it was something good or bad. John was over the moon about the move. He kept talking about the garden he'd plant, the man cave he'd set up in the basement. Even Sarah seemed excited about having a bigger room. The move to Mom's house brought a whole new set of challenges. I quickly realized that taking care of a stroke patient was a full-time job, one I wasn't equipped to handle alone. After a week of sleepless nights and stress-filled days, I hired a nurse to help out during the day. Nurse Jenny was a godsend. She came in every morning at 8 and stayed until 6, taking care of Mom's basic needs. But evenings and nights were all on me. I'd come home from work, exhausted, only to start my second shift as Mom's caretaker. The stroke had affected her speech, leaving her frustrated and often silent. I'd change her diaper, giving her as much dignity as I could in the process. Then came the sponge bath, the massage to keep her muscles from atrophying, the meds, and finally, dinner. It was grueling work, both physically and emotionally. Seeing my vibrant, independent mother reduced to this state broke my heart every day. But I did it because I loved her, because she'd have done the same for me. What I didn't expect was Sarah's reaction to her grandmother's condition. At 11, I thought she'd be old enough to understand, to help even. Boy, was I wrong. One evening, as I was heading to Mom's room, I saw Sarah dart past, her hand clamped firmly over her nose. Sarah, I called out. Where are you going? Don't you want to say hi to Grandma? She shook her head violently. No way. It smells gross in there. I was shocked. Sarah, that's not a nice thing to say. Grandma needs our help and support right now. I don't care, she spat back. She's disgusting. I'm not going near her. Before I could respond, she stormed off to her room, slamming the door behind her. I stood there, stunned and hurt. Where had my sweet little girl gone? I turned to John for support, but found none. Not my problem, he'd say whenever I asked for help with Mom. I didn't sign up for this. It stung, but I couldn't entirely blame him. He hadn't signed up for this. None of us had. Still, I couldn't help but feel resentful as I watched him play video games with Sarah or take her out for ice cream while I was elbow-deep in adult diapers and medication schedules. The one silver lining was seeing how close John and Sarah had become. They'd always had a good relationship, but now it seemed stronger than ever. I'd hear them laughing together in the living room or see them huddled over Sarah's homework at the kitchen table. It warmed my heart, even as it made me feel more isolated. 2 years flew by in a blur of bedpans, medications, and stolen moments of sleep. Mom's condition had stabilized, but she still needed constant care. I was exhausted, but I'd found a rhythm. Then, one ordinary Tuesday, everything fell apart. The phone rang while I was changing Mom's sheets. It was Mrs. Peterson, our old neighbor from the apartment complex. Kelly, dear, she said, her voice dripping with faux concern, I thought you should know. I've been seeing John around quite a bit, with company of young women. Different ones. Always very pretty. I thanked her and hung up, my mind reeling. That night, I confronted John. Oh, those are just potential tenants, he said smoothly. I'm showing them the apartment. I wanted to believe him. I really did. But doubt had taken root, and it grew like a weed. A week later, I found the lipstick stain. It was on the collar of his white shirt, a perfect crimson kiss. My hand shook as I held it up to the light, trying to convince myself it was just a pen mark or a food stain. But I knew better. I waited until his next business trip to make my move. With trembling hands, I unlocked the door to our old apartment. The sounds coming from the bedroom confirmed my worst fears before I even opened the door. There was John, in our bed, with a woman I'd never seen before. They scrambled to cover themselves, but the damage was done. "Kelly," John exclaimed, not even having the decency to look ashamed. "What are you doing here?" I couldn't speak. I just stood there, staring at the scene before me, feeling my world crumble around me. "Look," John said, his voice cold, "I'm sorry you had to find out this way. But let's be honest, Kelly. I'm bored. You're always busy with your mother. This is exciting." His words cut deeper than any knife. Without a word, I turned and left, my mind already racing towards what I needed to do next. The divorce proceedings were ugly. John fought me every step of the way, but in the end, we stood before a judge, dividing up our life together like it was nothing more than assets on a balance sheet. Then came the hardest part, custody of Sarah. At 12, she was old enough to have a say, and her choice broke my heart. "I want to live with Dad," she declared, her voice steady. "I don't want to be around Grandma anymore. It's gross and depressing. And Mom's always trying to make me help." The judge nodded sympathetically. He took into account John's higher income, the stability he could provide, and Sarah's clear preference. In the end, John was awarded primary custody. I was devastated, but I tried to focus on what was best for Sarah. John could give her opportunities one couldn't: private school, dance lessons, summer camps. We agreed on weekends and holidays for me, a schedule that looked so neat and tidy on paper, but felt like a gaping wound in my heart. As I watched Sarah pack up her things, chatting excitedly about her new room at Dad's new place, I felt like I was losing everything. My marriage was over, my daughter was leaving, and I was left with a house that felt more like a hospital than a home. The first few months after the divorce were tough, but I clung to my weekends with Sarah like a lifeline. We'd go to the movies, have ice cream in the park, or just hang out at home. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. Then, slowly, things began to change. Sarah started canceling plans. "I have a sleepover," she'd say. Or, "Dad's taking me to a concert." I tried to be understanding, to be the cool mom who didn't make a fuss. But each cancellation felt like a knife twisting in my gut. Soon, the cancellations became more frequent. Weeks would go by without a visit. My calls went straight to voicemail. Text messages were met with one-word responses, if I got any response at all. One Sunday, after yet another canceled visit, I decided to call Sarah directly. The phone rang once, twice, then went to voicemail. I tried again. This time, a robotic voice informed me that the number I was trying to reach had blocked my calls. My hand shook as I dialed John's number. "What do you want, Kelly?" His voice was cold, annoyed. "John, I can't reach Sarah. She's blocked my number." "What's going on?" There was a long pause. Then, "Look, Kelly, Sarah doesn't want to talk to you right now. You need to respect that." "Respect that?" "She's my daughter. She's also a person with her own feelings," John shot back. "And right now, she doesn't want to be around all that negativity at your place. I mean the sickness, the sadness. Sarah needs stability. She needs a normal family. Sarah sees Lisa as a mother figure now. She has a normal family life here. 2 parents, no sick relatives, no drama. Why can't you just let her be happy?" I couldn't speak. Tears were streaming down my face, and I was glad John couldn't see me. "Look," he continued, his voice softening slightly, "I know this is hard. But if Sarah doesn't want to see you right now, you need to respect that. Don't force it. It'll only push her away more." I wanted to scream, to argue, to demand my rights as a mother. But a small, rational part of my brain whispered that he might be right. If I pushed too hard, I might lose Sarah forever. I sank to the floor, phone clutched to my chest, and sobbed. My little girl, my Sarah, didn't want me anymore. Someone else was being her mother, kissing her goodnight, helping with homework, sharing all the moments I was missing. Mom found me there hours later, still on the floor. She'd managed to shuffle over with her walker, her face creased with concern. "Kelly," she said, her voice stronger than it had been in months. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" I looked up at her, this woman who'd been my rock for so long, who I'd been taking care of for years. In that moment, our roles reversed again. I was the child, seeking comfort from my mother. "Oh, Mom," I cried, reaching for her hand. "I've lost her. I've lost my baby girl." Mom squeezed my hand, her touch still weak but full of love. "No, Kelly. You haven't lost her. She's just lost right now. She'll find her way back to you. You'll see." 14 years. It's amazing how time can fly by and drag on simultaneously. Mom's condition improved slightly over the years, she regained some mobility and speech, but caring for her remained a full-time job. When she passed away peacefully in her sleep, I felt a mixture of grief and, shamefully, relief. Suddenly, I found myself alone in this big, empty house. The silence was deafening. No more beeping medical equipment, no more schedules of medications and therapy sessions. Just me, rattling around in rooms full of memories. Then, out of the blue, my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but the voice. I'd know it anywhere, even after all these years. "Mom? It's Sarah. I was hoping we could meet to talk." We arranged to meet at a cafe downtown. As I waited, my hands shaking around my coffee cup, I spotted a young woman entering. It took me a moment to realize it was Sarah. Gone was the gangly preteen I remembered. In her place stood a poised, beautiful young woman. "Hi, Mom," she said, sliding into the seat across from me. We made awkward small talk at first. She filled me in on her life, her job in marketing, her hobbies, her friends. Then she dropped the bombshell. "I'm getting married," she said, pulling an envelope from her purse. "Here's an invitation." My heart swelled with joy and a tinge of sadness. My little girl, getting married. And I'd missed so much. "Oh, Sarah, that's wonderful news. I'm so happy for you. Listen, if you need any help with the expenses." She cut me off abruptly. "Actually, Mom, that's kind of why I wanted to meet. I was hoping to talk about Grandma's inheritance. The house, her savings. I want them." I felt like I'd been slapped. "Excuse me?" "Look, Mom," she said, leaning forward. "That house is in a great area. It's worth a fortune. After the wedding, Jake and I want to live there. Start our family there." Anger bubbled up inside me. "Sarah, you haven't set foot in that house in over a decade. You said it disgusted you. You called it a tomb." She waved her hand dismissively. "I was a kid then. I've grown up. Times have changed. And let's face it, I'm Grandma's only grandchild. She would have wanted me to have it." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Wanted you to have it? Sarah, you didn't even come to her funeral. You didn't call, didn't write for years." "That's ancient history," she snapped. "The point is, that house should be mine. I deserve a comfortable life." "Deserve?" I was practically shaking with rage now. "You didn't lift a finger to help when Grandma was sick. I gave up my life to care for her. And now you think you deserve her house?" Sarah's face hardened. "Fine. If that's how you want to play it, I'll sue. I'll get what's rightfully mine." She stood up abruptly, snatching the wedding invitation from the table. "You know what? Forget it. You're not invited to the wedding. I don't need your negativity there. And I don't need your permission to take what's mine." As she stormed out of the cafe, I sat there, stunned. The daughter I'd loved, missed, and longed for all these years was gone. In her place was this stranger, cold and greedy. The days following that disastrous cafe meeting passed in a haze. I alternated between rage, grief, and a numbing emptiness. But as the dust settled, I realized something surprising. I felt relieved. The weight of hoping for reconciliation, of longing for a relationship with Sarah, had lifted. In its place was a strange sort of peace. I didn't attend Sarah's wedding. I didn't send a gift or a card. Instead, I spent that day volunteering at a local animal shelter, finding comfort in the unconditional love of abandoned pets who needed care. It felt fitting somehow. Curiosity got the better of me a few days later, and I found myself scrolling through Sarah's social media. There she was, radiant in white, smiling up at her new husband. For a moment, my heart clenched with the pain of what might have been. But then I saw it, a long, rambling post about her cruel mother who refused to attend her wedding, who withheld her rightful inheritance out of spite. I read it twice, marveling at the sheer audacity of her lies. Part of me wanted to comment, to set the record straight. But what would be the point? The people who mattered, the family who had seen me care for Mom all those years, knew the truth. As for everyone else? Well, their opinions of me based on a stranger's social media post were hardly my concern. A week later, my cousin Jeannie called. "Kelly, I thought you should know," she said, her voice a mix of anger and concern. "Sarah's been talking about suing you for your mom's estate." I sighed, unsurprised. "Let her try." "That's just it," Jeannie continued. "Apparently, she talked to a lawyer. He told her she doesn't have a leg to stand on. Your mom left everything to you, clear as day." I couldn't help but chuckle. Of course Mom had taken care of that. She'd always been the practical one. "Thanks for letting me know, Jeannie," I said. "But honestly, I don't care what Sarah does anymore. She's made her choices." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Then, I'm proud of you, Kelly. After everything you've been through, you deserve some peace." As I hung up the phone, I looked around the house, Mom's house, now my house. Every corner held memories, some painful, some beautiful. But for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe here. I walked to the window, looking out at the garden Mom had loved so much. It had gotten a bit overgrown in recent years, but I could see its potential. Maybe it was time to bring some life back to it. As I stood there, planning my next trip to the garden center, I realized something. The chapter of my life revolving around Sarah, the hope, the pain, the longing, was finally closing. But that didn't mean my story was over. Far from it. The garden was in full bloom when the call came. I'd spent the past few months throwing myself into its restoration, finding solace in the simple act of nurturing life. The roses Mom had loved so much were just starting to open, their scent filling the air as I pruned the bushes. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me press the green button. "Hello? Mom?" Sarah's voice, thick with tears. "Mom, I need your help." I froze, pruning shears still in hand. "Sarah, what's wrong?" "I'm pregnant," she sobbed. "And we're struggling." "Mom, I need money. You have to help me. You can't leave your grandchild without anything." I listened silently as she rambled on, her words becoming more frantic, more accusatory. "You abandoned me, Mom. You never tried to contact me, never fought for me. And now you're going to abandon your grandchild too?" Something inside me snapped. Not with anger, but with a calm, unshakable resolve. "Sarah," I said, my voice steady. "That's enough." She fell silent, probably shocked that I'd interrupted her tirade. "I never abandoned you. I sent child support every month without fail. I called, I texted, I emailed. You blocked my number. You chose your stepmother. You made your decisions, and I respected them, even when they broke my heart. But Mom..." "No, Sarah, I'm not finished. You're an adult now, about to be a parent yourself. It's time you took responsibility for your choices and your life. I'm not your bank. I'm not your safety net. And I'm not going to be manipulated by lies and guilt trips. I could hear her breathing heavily on the other end of the line. If you need help, go to your father and stepmother. They're your real family, remember? The ones you chose. I've made my peace with that. Now you need to make peace with the consequences of your choices. You can't do this, Sarah cried. I'm your daughter. Yes, you are, I said, my voice softening slightly. And I'll always love the little girl you were. But I don't know the woman you've become. And I don't think I want to. I took a deep breath. Goodbye, Sarah. I wish you and your child well. But please, don't contact me again. I ended the call before she could respond, my hand shaking slightly as I lowered the phone. For a moment, I stood there in the garden, surrounded by the blooming life I'd nurtured, feeling the weight of what had just happened. Then, slowly, I felt it lift. The last ties binding me to a painful past had been cut. The last what-ifs laid to rest. I looked around at the garden, at the house beyond. This was my life now. Not defined by loss or regret, but by the choices I made going forward. I picked up my pruning shears and turned back to the rosebush. There was still work to be done, still beauty to cultivate. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt truly, completely free.